Here we go. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Joe Hamilton, and I am new really to the advising role. I started here at SIUE advising in July, and I advise online graduate students in our new education programs that are fully online in principal preparation, teacher leader, and advanced teaching strategies in curriculum and instruction. So prior to my advising role, I worked as a counselor at Truman State University. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Missouri, and I worked for 28 years at the counseling center on Truman's campus, and including being assistant director for 20 years. And so when I joined this staff here at SIUE, they asked me to, give some information about supporting students' mental health. And so I thought that motivational interviewing would be a really good idea to help with the advising process. And it's used, primarily it started in the early 90s with addiction, but now it has been used in many different areas. In higher education, it was used a lot, or is used a lot in conduct, but also just in general healthcare, it's used a lot when doctors have been trained when they're talking with patients to use motivational interviewing and to help them with changing to healthier behaviors. And so it can be used in a lot of different areas. And I think that it also fits very much with advising. And so motivational interviewing is by William R. Miller and Stephen Rolnick. This book here that I have up there is the third edition of motivational interviewing. And it's definitely still a work in progress. Miller and Rolnick are continue to do research on behavior change, and I'm sure there will be a fourth edition coming out. They're still very active clinicians and researchers, and so you can expect that to be coming. So motivational interviewing is a collaborative conversation style for strengthening a person's own motivation and commitment to change. So you can think about when we're in the change process, a lot of times that happens by thinking about it, but also talking about it with others. And so this really gives us a process of how to have those conversations that help people change. And by the way, I'll have time I'm just going to go straight through the information so we get through it, but hopefully we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. So these are the 4 processes of motivational interviewing. And today, really, I'm just going to go over the basic ideas. I'll share some information at the end if you want further training in motivational interviewing. The training that I went through was about 8 hours. So if you really want to get fully trained, I would suggest doing something like that. So today, we're really just kind of giving you some of the basics. So one of the beginning processes would be engaging. And so it's very much that relationship is important in the process, and really looking at yourself as, going on a journey with someone. We're not really going to force people to make changes, right? We're going to just help them along the path to change. It's also guiding. So we're going to have in mind the behavior that we're helping the person change and focus on an end goal. So it's not just talking about change generally, what is it specifically, what are the behaviors that we want to help the person change? It's very much having, that behavior change in mind as we go through it. Evoking means eliciting or bringing forth, if you will, change talk from people and building a commitment to change. So that's the why of change. Why does this person want to change? Why is it healthy for them? And then finally, the planning component, so we really want to be aware of where a student would be, for example, in the change process. And then when they're ready for that, help them make a specific action plan. And so you might be brainstorming ideas or giving information, but we're not really giving advice. We're just helping the student create their own plan. All right, so like I just said, engaging is one of the processes, and it's called the relational foundation. And so we want to work on establishing a mutually trusting and respectful helping relationship. And these are the kind of questions that a student might be asking, right? When they first come to an advising appointment or talk to you, do I feel respected? Does my advisor listen to and understand me? Do I trust my advisor? Do I have a say in what happens during the appointment? Am I being offered options rather than a one-size-fits-all approach? And does my advisor negotiate rather than dictate to me? Now, advising a lot of times is more of a directing approach, right? So this next part talks about focusing. And for most of the time in advising, a directing approach, where we're sharing information and telling students, like, hey, you need to, these are the rules, you need to take this class at this time. But that's very appropriate. So most of the time we would be in a more directing style, and that approach is fine a lot of times for advising. But there might be situations where maybe, a student is trying to work on other behaviors, or you're helping a student maybe on academic probation, or maybe they just want to improve their academic performance. So they might be working in other areas like, improving study skills or time management, or maybe just having healthy behaviors. So we know a lot of health behaviors like sleep, how much they're studying, how much they are not doing like video games, things like that. All of these things are very much correlated with GPA, their drug and alcohol use. And so if you're helping a student with their grades, there might be some additional health behaviors that very much are affecting their academic performance. And that's really where this concept of motivational interviewing would come into play. And so if you think about a continuum of communication styles from directing to, on the other end would be following, where, as a therapist, I spent way much more time on the following end of the continuum, a lot of listening, observing, really trying to fully understand the person. And so motivational interviewing really falls in the middle, where we're accompanying the person on their journey, but we really have a direction that we're heading very specifically. And so that's kind of the idea of focusing and the communication style that goes along with it. And motivational interviewing, like I said, is a guiding style of communication. Now, the next part would be what we call evoking. And so it's really this idea of like bringing forth change talk that leads to the person being ready for change. Now, a lot of times when we are changing behaviors, even if we know something's healthy for us, habitual behaviors are very hard to change. And so it takes a while to change, even if it's something that the person wants to change. And it can even be more challenging when the person really doesn't even know maybe that they should change or that they want to change. And so anytime we're making a change, we can expect some ambivalence. It's pretty easy sometimes to just go back to the same old status quo, right? Or just fall into the old habits. But what we know from research and change is that the more a person engages in change talk, the more likely they're going to change. And the more they engage in what we call sustained talk, meaning just, saying, keeping the status quo, not changing behaviors, the less likely they are to change. So really, what we focus on a lot in motivational interviewing is helping people engage in change talk and trying to increase that. And so motivational interviewing helps you know the skills that really increase a person's change talk. So one of the ways we can increase change talk is by asking evocative questions. And one way to remember the four kind of general areas of these questions is by remembering DARN, which stands for desire, ability, reasons, and need. So an example of a desire question would be, what do you hope to get out of making this change? A question related to ability would be, how might you go about changing, right? What would that process look like? Reasons change would be, what current problems are caused by your behavior? What's going on currently that's causing some problems here, and get them thinking about, what is the reality of that? And then a need question is, how important is it to you to make this change? And then we want to, once we start to hear with these questions, the person engaging in change talk, then we can use ORs. So we want to ask open questions. An example would, what would this change mean to you? That's an elaboration. So getting them to expand on, this idea of changing. And how would things be different if you changed? What sort of change would that make in their life? So if you have a student that wants to improve their academic performance, hopefully they'd be like, well, if I got more sleep, then maybe I wouldn't be so tired in the evening when I'm trying to study. And so that's change talk, right? They're starting to think about how things could improve if they made a change. And then A stands for affirmation. And we always want to be really encouraging, especially when we hear people engage in change talk. We can say like, oh, that's a great idea, or, you're doing great, or you're making great progress, or yeah, I can't wait to see how things are better for you once you make that change, those kind of things. And then R is reflection. So we want to be regularly reflecting back whenever we hear change talk. So, if someone says, I want to spend more time studying, then we would want to reflect that back. So it sounds like, could say, sounds like you're ready to make a plan to improve the amount of time you're studying. It's really just kind of saying it back. Either sometimes it can be simply stating it back word for word, but usually we want to kind of put it into our own words and reflect it back. And then after you've kind of had a conversation for a while with someone, and they're talking about change, then we want to summarize that. So example could be, you're planning to make a study schedule, and your plan is to go to the library at least 2 hours every weekday, and make sure you find some place to study at home without distractions. All right, so it's kind of just summarizing all of those things that you've talked about with them that are part of their thoughts on how they're going to change. And by using these ORs, those help students own or argument for change. And that's really what we want to get. We don't want to be telling people how to change. That really does not bring about change. What we want to do is get people to talk about how they want to change, their desire to change, what their plan is, what their strengths are. The more we can get a person talking about change, the more likely they are to change. All right, so sometimes though, maybe a person's not so open and ready to change. And so this slide is about, what do we do in situations where maybe a person's not quite there yet? So one of the things that is very normal whenever we're talking to someone about change is that they engage in sustained talk. And that's what I was talking about earlier with the idea of like, the status quo. It's very natural anytime we're going through a change process, even when it's something that we know we want to change, to somewhat go back and be like, oh, well, maybe it'd be easier if I just keep things the same, right? And so sustained talk is to be expected. And so we're not really we're just gonna try to increase the change talk, but if we hear sustained talk, it's not necessarily a problem. But what we really want to pay attention to is for something called discord talk. So while sustained talk is directed to the actual behavior and the change process, discord talk is directed toward the helper. So if you're engaging with someone as an advisor and they start saying things like this idea of like blaming, it's your fault I can't get into this class, or this is your fault or it's the professor's fault. That's probably what we hear the most, right? It's the professor's fault that I'm doing badly in this class. Okay, that's really more discord talk. Or if they're just not really paying attention or not engaged in the process, those kind of things is what happens during discord when we're trying to help someone and you're like, it's just not going anywhere. So for a lot of times in the past, especially when I remember when I first started as a therapist years ago, they talk about with addiction treatment, the idea of like the person's resistant or in denial. And really that kind of thinking is really considered outdated at this point. If you are getting that kind of resistance for a person as a helper, that means you're just not taking the right approach. So if we take the right approach, most people, they might not necessarily change their behavior, but they will engage in change talk. And so being aware of discord is really important. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the change process in a minute that can help you know kind of what to look for and how to approach that. So now if you're having sustained talk or discord, you can respond with emphasizing autonomy. So, that's important to be like, have the person understand that, yeah, it is up to them to make the change. You can't change for them. And that's not really the expectation, right? The change is up to them. And we can also do some reframing and reflection. Those are good things when we get a sustained talk or discord. And also though, with discord, if you kind of like step on someone's toes and they're getting angry, it's okay to apologize and say, oh, I'm sorry, whatever's happening, just apologize for it and try to go forward. But be affirming, still talk about how you, hope that they can make this change and how helpful you think it would be for them. And try to shift the focus too. Don't really, you just don't want to get caught up in a battle about it, but stay relaxed and calm and just try to encourage them to keep talking about change. One concept that's related, but is not the same as motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing is about the skills and how you have the conversation. But this is from the trans-theoretical model by Prochaska and DiClemente, and it's the stages of change and how the process of change happens. So having an awareness of where a person is in the change process can be very helpful to know what sort of motivational interviewing skills to use, all right? So I'm just going to go through how change works. So if we start here at the top with the idea of even before a person has thought at all about changing, right? That's what we call pre-contemplation. Basically, it's not even really on their mind. So they don't know necessarily that the change should happen. And so sometimes we might, get a person who comes in and it's very obvious to you how they need to make a change in their behavior in order to be successful. But for whatever reason, it's not on their radar yet. And so we then thing that they've moved to in order to start really on the change process is to move them into contemplation. So that means just thinking and talking about changing their behavior. Okay, and then next, after you get them to contemplate or think about that behavior change, then we're going to be moving down into preparation. What are the things that they need to do in order to put a plan into action and actually change their behavior. Then after, they've been in the action phase for a while, and this can take, months or years, a lot of times for people till something becomes what we call the maintenance, where you're doing it on a regular basis. That becomes a regular part of your habit. I think, they say it's like about 5 years that you have to be in maintenance to where it's just kind of off your radar. It just becomes a regular habit that you don't even think about. And so a lot of times when people change a behavior, then we relapse, right? Where we kind of just, sometimes it can be a conscious decision, like I'm not going to do it anymore. Or sometimes you just like wake up one day and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I'm not doing that behavior. I've fallen back into my old habits. And so I like in particular the way that this diagram depicts the stages of change, because it just shows you that relapse is a part of the process sometimes. And so relapse doesn't mean you failed. It just means that, something's going on with our plan that's not working. And we want to go back really to contemplation. Is this a change we actually want to make? And if so, do we need to come up with a new plan in order to make it happen? All right, but relapse is just part of that process. And so it's really important when we're talking to someone to understand where they are in this change process. A lot of times we, whether it's as an advisor, or certainly this would happen to me sometimes as a therapist as well, but really when we're just talking to friends or family and giving advice, or maybe as a parent, we'll just jump right into action and we tell people what to do. And we're trying to be helpful, but if they are not ready for that stage of change, it's not really helpful at all. In fact, they say about 20% of the time is that kind of advice helpful for people, because that's about how often you encounter someone who's in that stage, right? And so we want to try to be aware of where they are in this process. And then we're just going to move them each step. So if they're in pre-contemplation, we're just going to try to get it on the radar, get them to think about, and talk about the change that they would want to make, move them into contemplation. And we're not going to be moving ahead. We're not going to talk about specific plans until we really get them into the contemplation stage. And so that was when they were really talking more directly about, hey, this is a change I could make. I think this is a good idea, right? And then next, after they've moved from contemplation, then we can start moving into actually, okay, what are some actual steps you might take? What can I do, to support you in this change? What kind of planning do you need to do? And then after we are getting the talk about preparation, then they can move into the action steps. So at that point, it might be okay to give them some direct advice, but we don't want to do it until they're ready to actually change their behavior. And then, of course, once they're in the action and maintenance, this is really where we want to offer up a lot of support and encouragement to keep them changing their behaviors. All right, so, and then this is what we talk about next, back to motivational interviewing, is when they are in that position of preparation, moving from preparation to action, then we can do the planning. And so how do we know when they're ready? We want to see increased change talk. So basically more than half the time they should be talking about what kind of changes they're going to make. We would see some actual steps, maybe they're doing some preparation to change. And we would see, reduced sustained talk. That would be less than 50% of the time. And some resolve, you know, like, oh, I think this is a good idea. I can do it. Doing some envisioning, you know, like thinking how they should be talking about how they think things will improve if they make this change. And then just general having questions about the change process and what that might look like, how that would work. So when we see someone who you're seeing the signs of readiness, these are some things that you can do to help them move closer to getting ready for change. And one thing is recapitulation. So you want to summarize all the change talk you've heard up to that point, you know, just like I talked about earlier, what sort of plan, what kind of thoughts do they have? State back the kind of changes that they could expect, how it's going to help improve their life. We want to ask a key question. So an example of that might be, what might you do next? What can I do to help you with this change process? Those kind of questions. And then as they're talking, a lot of times you'd want to do what's a pregnant pause. And I know sometimes this really struggles with people to have silence, but when you really hear someone talking about change and you can still see the wheel spinning up there, you want to just, kind of sit back and let them think a little bit and give the student time to reflect and process really what that change would look like for them. All right, and then once they're ready, they're talking about change, they're on board, they want your help in making that change plan, then these would be some different scenarios that you might expect and how you would respond to each one. So scenario one is if there is a clear plan, right? So the student says, okay, I know what I want to change. I want to study at least 3 hours every day. Okay, so you have a clear plan. And then so you would be working directly on the plan. How are you ready to implement the plan? What do you need for that to happen? And then once you've talked through the plan that the student has, one way you can be helpful too is to troubleshoot maybe the obstacles that are in the way. Sometimes those are clear to people and sometimes they really haven't thought about it or haven't thought it through at all. So you can help them talk through possible obstacles that would really, push them into relapse. So how can we prevent those and think about those up front to help them with the change process? All right, our scenario two then would be if sometimes there are several clear options. So, there might be a lot of different ways that they could take an approach to changing their behavior. So first thing you want to do is confirm their goal, what is it specifically that they want to change? And then kind of help them go through all the possible options and then figure out from that student, help the student decide for themselves what's the best option for them. And then once you hear what seems to be that pretty, what's the best option for them, or maybe it might be, they're all equal. So just kind of telling them, hey, this I think is the best option for you. Then we want to summarize that plan and strengthen a commitment for following that plan. And then there can also be a scenario three where there's no plan, there's no ideas. You're developing a plan from scratch. So again, you confirm what that overall goal is for them. Then you're just kind of brainstorming really. What are all the different options or steps, plans you could take? Really just try to figure out from the student what they would most be willing to engage in, what their preferences are, and then negotiate a plan for them to try. What are the things they can try in order to change their behavior? And then again, at the end, you want to troubleshoot and talk about any obstacles that might come into play. All right, and then once they're actually engaging in the behavior, we're not done, right? A lot of times people tend to be like, okay, well, I've given my advice, I've told them what to do, now they're good, right? And then we're like, I don't understand why this person isn't changing, but change it takes a lot more than just a one-time setting a plan. It's a process, even after a person has made a commitment to change. It's how do I really change those behaviors on a regular basis and make it a new habit? And so we always want to be encouraging. And sometimes this can be difficult because people sometimes takes a long time to change, and we only see really small little changes taking place. But we want to be super encouraging of even just small changes that we see. And that's the process towards changing. And then so might be a good idea, to follow up with a student if you've met with them and talked about possible changes. You might have set a time for them to meet with them again to follow up. But even just like a check-in email can make a world of difference of whether or not they follow through with implementing their plan. So that's a good idea I used to, as a therapist, I put it on my calendar, on my schedule, and say, check in with this person, see how they're doing with the plan that we discussed. So that can be a good thing, especially if you can't meet with people regularly. So, but just check in with an email. Hey, how are things going? How's your plan working out? Any obstacles you're encountering, that kind of thing. And another thing that might be a good idea, and this is not part of motivational interviewing that I'm aware of, but I always would talk with students about, okay, what can you use as a reward? If you engage in this behavior change, sometimes that's enough, that's enough of an incentive, and people are very proud of themselves and things are working out better. So that can be enough. But other times, making a change cannot be so great. So I would talk to them about, well, how can you reward yourself in a way that would keep, really acknowledge the change and keep you moving forward with the change. Right, so if you're interested in more training on motivational interviewing, here's a website, motivationalinterviewing.org, and that has training that is available. It's a site for trainers where they can offer their training, and a lot of it, especially now, is available online. And then these are my references for the presentation. So of course, Miller and Rolnick's book, Motivational Interviewing, Helping People Change, 3rd edition. This is information from Prochaska and Di Clemente. That's the stages of change model that I showed you. And then I found this series of motivational interviewing videos on YouTube by Nathan Gellert. And they're divided up into small segments, probably maybe 10, 15 minutes each. And each one is a chapter. And that I found very helpful. It has a lot of good information about motivational interviewing. It's broken down into small parts. So if you're interested in that and more about motivational interviewing, I'd encourage you to look at that. There's also a ton of videos of people demonstrating motivational interviewing techniques that you can find on the internet. A lot of it would be more related to therapy, helping people with addictions, but you can also find videos of people describing patient care and how to help in that way. I haven't really found any of for advisors specifically. If you find anything like that, please send them my way. But yeah, there's lots of information, helpful information on the internet about motivational interviewing if you're more interested in learning about it. All right, so now I'll just open it up for questions.
So I'll start with one. Since you've been at SIUE as an academic advisor and realizing that you do work with a population that's probably above the level of your garden variety advisee, have you used this motivational interview, and what did it look like? Or can you
so really not so much at this point. Not only are my students grad students, professionals, most of them are teachers. They've only been in the class about 3 weeks now. So, so luckily I haven't really encountered anybody who's really struggling at this point. But I do still, I think, very much take the approach, like a lot of the relationship building certainly still happens within my advising approach. really, having a student-centered approach where I let them, share what their goals are. Yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how much of it I actually use, especially with the students in my programs, but not a lot so far, which that sounds like a good thing. I would hate for someone to have, 3 weeks into classes already be struggling a lot, but so far it hasn't happened yet. Any other questions out there? I don't know if there's anything. I suppose people can use the chat. I didn't look. Nothing in the chat. But feel free if you don't want to ask to put a question in the chat as well.
I have a question, Joe.
Oh, sure.
Hi. So there was a slide that you showed us that had sort of an approach to use to motivate for motivational interviewing, and I think it was DARN, D-A-R-N. Could you show us that slide again, please?
Yeah, of course. Share my screen again. Okay.
Desirability, reasons, need.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you very much.
you're welcome.
Okay, you have a question in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this question is, how do you deal with people who might be dealing with ADD, ADHD, and getting them motivated because they seem to be dealing with other barriers? So I think that, I'd still be looking at what are the behavior changes that the student could make or the individual could make. Trying to think of how to make this a succinct thing. Certainly, I could go a lot of different directions, but I think what you want to do is really kind of break it down. So if a person has ADHD, we really want to keep it simple and like short, changes, like nothing really too big and complicated, right? So what your goal probably would be is really help them with the plan, but then really break it down into very, very small steps. And I think that's probably the approach that I would take with someone with ADD or ADHD, is to figure out what are they capable of, what kind of change they're capable of, and then make it really small steps, really small increments, and then really be encouraging and helpful as they go through that process. Those are my thoughts on that.
So I have a question. This is Brenda. I'm also at SIUE across the campus. So I'm in general advising, and I think this is probably the case on other advising offices. Due to caseloads, I really just can see students once, maybe twice a semester.
Right.
And some 3 or 4 times. And those probably are the students who might be needing that change. But how do you work with this in sort of that type of scenario?
Right. So, and I think what you want to focus on then is not the idea of getting them to the end goal, but let me actually go back to my presentation again. What I would really focus on is thinking about where are they in the change process, okay? And so if you're meeting with someone just once and they are in pre-contemplation, you are not going to get to action. You're just not. So think about then my goal is just to get them moving to contemplation, just get them talking about change, right? And then same way, if they're in contemplation, all I'm doing is getting them moving toward preparation. All right. Now, then what you can do possibly is, like I said, do maybe a check-in email or something like that, you know, and think about, okay, what would be, how do I move them forward, depending on the response I get back from them. But what we often do, I think it as advisors, because we're so much in directing mode, that it's hard, we think that we're not helping someone unless we're telling them exactly what to do, right? and that's where we are most of the time, and that's perfectly fine. But sometimes we have someone, right, who needs to make a major behavior change, and you cannot do that in one appointment a semester. It's just not going to happen. So really your goal is just, how do I get them moving forward with the process? And then you know, maybe you can, with a handful who are really struggling, meet more often, or maybe it's making referral like to counseling services, or you know, the other resources we have here on campus. But I would just be, you know, think about where they are and how do I move them forward in the stages of change. You're just not going to be able to make a real dramatic change with one appointment for most situations.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
You're welcome.
So I have a situation that I'm a major advisor, and sometimes I think I do such a good job that my students don't want to leave the university. And, you know, a lot of them are signing up for grad programs, which is good. But I get a sense that at least one student that I'm working with right now, it's not really what she wants to do. She just doesn't want to leave the security of the college atmosphere. She's been in it for like 6 years.
Right.
And she's, you know, she was supposed to graduate last spring, and she, you know, she dropped back some classes, and then she's supposed to graduate in the fall, and she dropped back some classes. And now she needs one more class. She's going to take 3. She's, you know, she's turned 26. She's
Right.
no longer under her parents' insurance. She's like, should I just take more classes so I can get student insurance? Should I just enter? I mean, you know, in the grad program that she's interested in, she's not ready to get into. She needs, you know, and the program director has said, hey, you know, you just need to really think about this before you, because she's lacking some science classes to get in. And she's like, well, how about this other grad program? I'm like, how do I get, I said, could it be that you're feeling lost, not because you're going to lack insurance, but because you're going to lack school?
Right.
I mean, you know, because the motivation, you know, would be to change from being a student to being a graduate. Do you think that the motivational interview is appropriate in this context?
I think that I think it would still be helpful to work on change talk, you know, and one of the things was envisioning, you know, what might the student's future look like not being a student anymore. But I wonder if, you know, to me, as a therapist, I'm thinking, oh, maybe this is a whole different thing going on though, really, you know. One of the things that I worked on a lot with students as a therapist is identity development. And so for a lot of individuals, their identity as a student has always been the major thing in their life, right? It's maybe what they're praised for or where they get attention. And so the idea of letting that go can be challenging for them. And it really can be a grieving process for some students. And so it's hard to say exactly what's happening with this student, or could be an anxiety situation too, right? But I still think that you could, you know, really focus on that, getting the change talk, but not about, like, you know, school. It's getting her talking about what would being a professional look like, or what would it be like for you to not be a student anymore, and getting her forward thinking in that way. But yeah, I think it might be also an identity issue for sure.
I think it could unpack a little by little though.
Yes. Yeah.
So, thanks. That's helpful. Put it in context.
Oh, and there's is that all the questions? Any other questions out there?
Well, Joe, I guess you've done such a fabulous job that nobody has any questions, but I think this was super informative and a great topic for our brown bag. I just want to make a shameless plug. We're here the second Friday of every month doing a brown bag. Sometimes it's a workshop and sometimes it's just a conversation. Yes, you're getting rounds of applause. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And so next month in December, it's just gonna, I think we're doing a conversation. I'm gonna get the list up. And then come January, we have a full slate of content every month. And so you'll be happy for that. We have a series. Shh, I'm not supposed to tell this, but since the 13 of us are here, it's just between us friends. We're having a series on Ryan Eshivaria's series on his LGBTQ plus allyship and advocacy and understanding these identities. It's a two-part workshop, and it'll be promoted and launched in January. It'll be on the website, but I understand that some of us have to meet an EDI objective for our annual evaluation, and this would certainly count. Again, shameless plug. So, Joe, thank you so much for entertaining us for this past several minutes and for sharing your wisdom with us. And I hope maybe we can catch you again. And the rest of you, thank you so much for joining our session. It's been really good. It's been really good to see you and connect with you on a monthly basis. And we hope we'll see you again. So we can. I see. How do we find out about these? You're getting a lot of props, Joe. I hope you're looking at the chat. ILACADA.org. They'll be listed on ILACADA.org. If you're a member of ILACADA, you get an email every time there's a brown bag. It's also on our Facebook page. If you look at ILACADA.org right now, there's information there. Also, my email address is there if you want to reach out to me directly. And yeah, if I'm currently not shared by a colleague. Great. So Andrea got a sneak peek pass. Very good. If you want information about joining ILACADA, please reach out to me directly. Go to ILACADA at ilacada.org and you'll see my contact info there and all of this. All right. Joe, thanks so much again. Bravo, bravo, bravo. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I shared my email in the chat if anybody has any follow-up questions, or I can also hang on for a little bit. If anybody wants to, some one-on-one questions, that would be fine too.
Yes, and I will post this. I'll get the recording posted probably by next week.
All right, thanks everybody.